Tupac Shakur was a visionary, a rapper, and a poet. He's someone whose words and lyrics captivated the hearts and minds of millions. One song in particular captivated mine. It was a song titled "To Live and Die in LA." He said, "It wouldn't be LA without Mexicans. Black love, brown pride, and it sets again." You see, for the child of a black father and Mexican mother, or a Blaxican, these words envision a world that I could only dream of. A world in which I could be black and brown at the same time, in the middle of a community that was racially divided by race. But in my struggle to identify, I realized one thing. I was never truly alone. In the summer of 2014, I started a project called Blaxicans of LA, which sought to understand Los Angeles and the experiences of Blaxicans. It integrated social media, academic research, and photography. And as I compiled interviews and took more and more photos, I realized that this was part of a larger movement. You see, this country is becoming increasingly multiracial, multi-ethnic, and multilingual by every single day. In the 1970s, 1% of all children born were multiracial. Today, it's about 12%. While this may seem novel, a cursory glance through Latin America's racial history shows us that this experience has been happening for centuries. When the Spanish colonized the Americas, and Mexico in particular, they devised a pictorial representation of race and multiracial identity, a system of paintings called las castas. Las castas characterize people according to their phenotype or physical characteristics, hair texture, skin tone, and others as well. Names were given to people like mulata, mulatto, pardo, lobo, mestizo, mestiza, and countless others. It was an experience that carried over to the founding of this very city. You see, Los Angeles was founded in 1781 by a group of Afro-Mexican settlers, indigenous folks, and Spanish. It was a group of people who in many ways could have been Blaxicans themselves. It's an experience that carries over to this very day. Amanda was born and raised in East LA, in a predominantly Mexican home to a Mexican single mother. She experienced anti-black racism both in her home and outside of it. It wasn't until she got older that she realized that what she was experiencing was not a reflection of her own story or experience, but really the faults of others. Or Richard, a self-identified Afro-Mexican whose parents instilled a deep sense of pride in him, to be both an Afro descendant and also indigenous as well. Today, he's a prominent filmmaker in Los Angeles. But what does it mean to be a woman, to be black, to be brown, and to be Muslim in this current political and racial climate? You see, Myri's story pushes boundaries and allows us to think about political and racial coalitions in a way that has not been possible. But this is also a story about erasure. What does it mean to grow up your entire life believing that the people who raised you, your mother and father, were both non-black Mexicans, and then realizing one day that your father was actually African American, and your mother lied to you for fear, in fear of you being isolated and marginalized from the rest of your family? This is Maggie's story. But it's not just about pain and trauma. It's also about accommodation and sometimes joy. You see, Maria's parents met on a public bus in the early 1980s in South Los Angeles. Maria's father was a bus driver, and her mother took his bus every single morning to work. There was an instant connection, love at first sight, we can say. But there was one problem. Maria's father didn't speak a word of Spanish, and her mother didn't speak a word of English. So it took her father 6 months to learn how to ask her out on a date in Spanish, which she agreed to. And it took him another 6 months to learn how to ask her to marry him, which she also agreed to. You see, but it's also about what it means to grow up in a community that forces you to pick sides. For a lot of Blaxicans in South Central Los Angeles, their experiences were deeply divided along racial ties. Memo is someone who grew up in South Los Angeles at a time that was deeply divided by race and structural racism. It wasn't until he got older that he realized that it was never a question of either or, but really a question of and. For Memo, it was about being black and brown at the same time. But while this story and this project is about faces and the environment, it's also about the power of hands and what we can carry in our hands. Sometimes it's trauma and pain and memory and history, and sometimes it's photos of our parents. You see, how can hands bring together worlds and people in a way that words and social movements cannot? But while this is very much a story about Los Angeles and racial dynamics and identity throughout Los Angeles, the Blaxkin experience can tell us so much about the future of race and identity in the US. Since the early 1990s, Latino immigrants have been immigrating to places like Alabama, Georgia, North Carolina, and living and working alongside African Americans. And oftentimes replicating some of the very experiences and trends found in Los Angeles with Blaxkins and black and brown communities. When I first met Ken, Sophia, and Alejandra in the summer of 2015, I was instantly captivated by the love and intimacy that they shared for one another. It was deeply moving. But I wanted to know one thing. I wanted to know what it would mean to raise a black-skinned daughter in this current political and racial climate. Their response floored me. They said, "We will teach her to be explicitly black and explicitly brown. There is no other way." As 2043 continues to be a moment that social scientists predict that there will be more people of color than white Americans in this country, for some, that brings trepidation and anxiety, or even fear. For others, that brings joy, promise, and hope. But for families like Ken, Alejandra's, and Sophia's, and the city of Los Angeles, and the people behind me, 2043 has already arrived. Thank you.